Once we had arranged our dining room, it became more of a showcase than a space for daily use. We found ourselves gravitating towards a kitchen, where a cozy ambience enveloped us. This trend had persisted for quite some time, with the kitchen becoming our preferred gathering spot. I had even established my workstation there, surrounded by an elegantly detailed design that afforded me ample space to organize everything I needed for my tasks. My meticulous nature meant I took great pride in maintaining cleanliness, and I relished the soft, diffused light that illuminated the area, creating a warm and inviting atmosphere. One day, while I was engrossed in my work, she entered the room. The sharp click of her new high heels echoed against the floor, announcing her presence. She called out to me, but I was too focused to respond. It was only after I finished my task that I shouted back, "I'm here. Can you come in for a moment?" She rolled her eyes in response, stepping into the doorway with an air of impatience. "What is it?" she inquired, clearly in a hurry. I reached out and drew her close, wrapping my arms around her. At 47, she still stood tall and graceful, her figure alluring and well-proportioned. Having never experienced the challenges of post-pregnancy weight, she maintained a physique reminiscent of the one I had admired when we married 27 years ago. While I had always appreciated her chestnut hair, I felt a pang of disappointment when she dyed it blonde 4 months back. It changed her in a way that felt unfamiliar to me. Perhaps my feelings were tinged with bias. "I won't take long," I reassured her, sensing her impatience. "Besides, I have a feeling your meeting might be canceled. Let's talk for a moment, and then I'll let you finish your work in peace. You made it pretty clear where you prefer me to be." She sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes again before taking a seat opposite me. "Thanks." As I said, "I'll be brief," I continued, leaning forward slightly. "I want you to think carefully and be honest. This isn't just a hypothetical question. In monetary terms, how much do you think intimacy with you is worth? Do you believe different acts hold different values? I know escorts have varying rates based on their services. I'm not entirely sure how much women charge for their affections, but I imagine it's considerable. I need your help to establish a baseline for some research." As I spoke, I paused to gauge her reaction, wondering if I should also factor in elements like enthusiasm, skill, and the seductive touches that could enhance the experience, such as lingerie or the ambience created by soft lighting, candles, or indulgences like strawberries and chocolate. I contemplated the appeal of motels and similar venues, noticing how her expression shifted as I continued my inquiry. Her mouth slightly opened in disbelief, but when I paused to give her a chance to respond, she quickly closed it. "What are you talking about?" "This isn't funny, Donald. It's ridiculous," she replied, using my full name, a clear sign of her growing irritation. I knew that pressing further would only ignite her anger. "Oh, I get it, Sherry. It's absurd, just like everything else has been since you started flirting with Jameson," I retorted, my tone sharp. "So it's Jameson, is it?" I added, a hint of mockery in my voice. What a pretentious name. He's just some bumpkin in a suit. His friends call him Jimmy Jam, and honestly, that name suits him better. Her eyes narrowed in response to my jabs, and I sensed a storm brewing. "Go on. Mount St. Helens. Erupt already," I muttered under my breath, provoking her further. "I've told you already. There's nothing going on between us. He doesn't even mean that much to me," she shot back, clearly upset by my insinuations. "Is that really what this is about?" she challenged, her voice rising. "I swear, if you mention him again, I'm walking out." Unable to resist, I smirked. Jameson, Jimmy Jam. It sounds like a rapper's name, doesn't it? A backwoods rapper rhyming about his pickup truck, partying, and maybe even getting involved with married women. I see a promising future for him with plenty of money ahead. A flash of surprise crossed her face, but it quickly faded into a narrow gaze as realization dawned on her. "I'm truly sorry, Sherry," I said, attempting to smooth things over. "I got off track, and it won't happen again. Let's shift the focus back to something more practical. To be honest, I had my reservations about coming here at first. Even though my career has been progressing well, I've come to appreciate this place more and more. Just yesterday, I managed to play a round of golf in the last week of February. The weather has been unpredictable, but I've decided to stay here regardless. You know what I love most about this place? It's one of the few states where you can still file an alienation of affection lawsuit. You can actually sue someone for taking away your spouse, which is quite rare these days. With this, I could see her confusion turning into curiosity. Of course, it requires a specific set of circumstances to win and receive compensation, but the possibility is still intriguing. That's why I've delved deep into this research. I want to compile a thorough report outlining behaviors in question, their frequency, and the methods I've used to gather the data. I have a few video recordings and several witnesses that should provide a solid foundation for my conclusions. However, it would be immensely helpful if you could clarify something for me. How much do you think a night with you is worth? Almost like a consultation with an expert. My lawyer found my idea amusing, but ultimately saw its potential, citing precedent. This could change how people view these types of lawsuits, raising the financial stakes, and potentially leading to more settlements. This would benefit lawyers and make it easier for judges to determine appropriate financial payouts. I watched her expression shift, unsure whether she was processing my request or merely angry at my audacity. I need your cooperation on this. If you don't, my lawyer will ensure your involvement is thoroughly documented, step by step. These are the kind of statements I need, and you should consider the benefits you might gain once the separation and divorce papers are signed. After that, any expenses we incur will cease. We won't even need to serve official notice. It's simple enough to visit his office. Think ahead about how much you and Jameson can save on gas and hotel expenses if you start living together. By the way, he does have a spare room if he can persuade his wife to agree. Incidentally, I've shared my findings with her, and she plans to use them in her case against you. So it might be better if you meet somewhere else. You could even split the attorney's fees with her. As I spoke, I saw her expression change, a mix of disbelief and anger swirling in her eyes. I had pushed her too far. His gaze drifted down to Sherry, who suddenly collapsed unconscious on the dining room floor. It wasn't a fall so much as a balloon slowly deflating under pressure. I had never intended for it to escalate this way. So much for being an expert consultant. I neatly printed out my research, folded it, and placed it on her chest. She would find it once she awakened. Meanwhile, Mrs. Jimmy Jam and I were off to dinner at the best barbecue joint in town. I hoped Sherry would understand that once the door closed behind her today, there would be no turning back. I needed to change the locks. It had reached a point where I couldn't even enjoy a meal in peace. Sherry had called me 10 times, and I had to mute her. At that moment, Mrs. Jimmy Jam was recounting one of her amusing stories about her wandering husband. She mentioned she was considering writing a book titled Life with a Dog. It turned out Sherry wasn't the only woman in his life. She offered to provide me with the addresses of the other wives, so I could share my plan with their husbands once mine was finalized. After all, we didn't want everyone to flip the script all at once, right? As I refocused on her story, I realized that things were far from simple. Sherry wasn't ready to end the marriage. She was genuinely remorseful and insisted it would never happen again, claiming she had learned from her mistakes. For 5 months, she fought to salvage the relationship, but eventually, she gave up, signed the divorce papers, and returned home. By the time the process started, Jameson had attracted media attention, and the judge, a quirky old-timer with 2 ex-wives, permitted me to testify as a witness. The courtroom erupted in laughter when he tried to blend into the background. Surprisingly, he turned out to be quite wealthy, owning half a car dealership. In the end, I received a settlement much larger than I had anticipated. Mrs. Jameson got the house and a quarter of the dealership. When everything was finalized, she shared my findings with the other 3 husbands. As it turned out, he was fortunate to keep his job as a car salesman rather than owning a stake in the dealership. For nearly 3 years, I stayed away from women until I met a fiery redhead from the countryside, a widow with 2 young sons. I began coaching her kids in soccer when a friend encouraged me to give it a try. Initially, things didn't click between us, but over time we grew closer. She often teased me about my chivalrous gestures in public, holding doors open, pulling out chairs at restaurants, and always being attentive in social settings. She kept joking until our third date, when I finally lost my patience. If you don't like being treated like a lady, that's your choice. But if you're with me, I will treat you that way. If you want to be treated poorly, go back to where you came from. She looked confused, but quietly waited for me to open her car door. We drove home in silence. Later, as I walked her to her door, she apologized. I did my best to explain my perspective. I was raised with certain values. My grandfather believed women should be treated with respect in public like a lady, and in private, like a partner. And, of course, he had his views on intimacy. Your eyes glimmer in the moonlight. And if I were to be in a relationship with you, how would I engage with you in that intimate space? I asked. I would cherish you as an incredible individual, focusing on making our time together unforgettable. My goal isn't to dominate or control, but to be a lover who leaves you completely fulfilled. But I feel we haven't reached that moment yet. Do you know what might be holding you back, my dear? Overthinking, I admitted. The next morning, we were late picking up the boys, and her mom gave us a knowing smile. A year later, when we gathered them around the table to share the news that in 5 months, I would be their new dad, they burst out in joy. We had a playful relationship, and I joked with the eldest, telling him he'd be the one to carry the ring. The youngest was curious about his role and asked, "What will my part be?" I replied, "Well, we'll need a flower girl." "Mommy, Daddy wants me to be the flower girl," he exclaimed. I reassured him, "You'll look absolutely stunning in the dress." He seemed on the verge of tears, so I pulled him into my arms and sat him on my lap. "I'm just kidding, son. How about you carry the ring, and your brother will be the best man?" No one objected, and that's exactly how it went. 5 years later, it's amusing to hear them grumble about having to look after their little sister. After that, I never saw Sherry again, according to my older brother. She lived alone and worked 2 jobs to support herself after the divorce. It was as if she had vanished. You know what? I don't regret for a second that Sherry cheated on me and that our marriage ended. In fact, I'm grateful to her because now I'm truly happy with a woman who gave me a daughter. The only thing I regret is wasting 27 years on someone who didn't deserve me.